Before swords clashed and cities fell, the story of Saladin and Balian of Ibelin was shaped by two very different worlds. In the late 12th century, the Holy Land was divided between Crusader kingdoms and rising Muslim power. The Kingdom of Jerusalem, fragile and divided, ruled coastal cities and inland fortresses. Among its nobles stood Balian of Ibelin, a man known less for cruelty and more for honor, diplomacy, and restraint. He was not a reckless warlord like Raynald of Chatillon, but a thoughtful noble, tied by marriage and loyalty to Jerusalem's ruling elite. Across the divide stood Salah ad-Din Yusuf ibn Ayyub, known to history as Saladin. By the 1180s, Saladin had unified Egypt and Syria under one banner. Unlike earlier Muslim leaders, he was patient, strategic, and deeply conscious of legitimacy. His goal was not chaos, but restoration, particularly the recovery of Jerusalem, which he saw as both a political and spiritual duty. For years, an uneasy balance existed. Treaties were signed and broken. Caravans moved, pilgrims traveled, and truces offered moments of calm. Balian of Ibelin often acted as a mediator, believing coexistence was still possible. Saladin, meanwhile, watched and waited, knowing that the Crusader states were weakening from within. The collision was inevitable, and when it came, it would reshape the Middle East forever. Peace collapsed not because of Balian, but because of Raynald of Chatillon, Lord of Kerak. Raynald repeatedly violated truces, attacking Muslim caravans and threatening Mecca itself. These actions humiliated Saladin and outraged the Muslim world. Balian of Ibelin opposed Raynald's recklessness. He understood that these provocations would bring disaster. But the Crusader kingdom was politically fractured, unable to restrain its most dangerous nobles. In 1186 CE, Raynald attacked a major caravan under Saladin's protection. This act ended any remaining chance of peace. Saladin declared jihad not as blind fanaticism, but as a calculated political and military campaign to dismantle Crusader power. Balian saw the storm approaching. Saladin did too. The difference was preparation. In July 1187, Saladin lured the Crusader army into the arid plains near the horns of Hattin. Thirst, heat, and poor leadership doomed the Crusaders. King Guy of Jerusalem led an exhausted force into Saladin's trap. Balian of Ibelin was not present at Hattin, a fact that would later shape history. The Crusader army was annihilated. Raynald was captured and personally executed by Saladin. King Guy was taken prisoner. The true cross was lost. This was not just a military defeat, it was the collapse of Crusader power. Saladin now held the field, the momentum, and the moral high ground. City after city fell. Acre, Nablus, Jaffa. One by one, the Crusader world crumbled. Only Jerusalem remained. After Hattin, Balian of Ibelin found himself in a moral trap. His family, his wife Maria Comnene, and their children were trapped in Jerusalem. Balian sought safe passage from Saladin to escort them out. Saladin agreed, but under one condition. Balian swore an oath not to take up arms against him. This moment is crucial. Saladin trusted Balian's honor, and Balian accepted the terms. When Balian reached Jerusalem, he found a city in panic. There were almost no trained knights left. Refugees flooded the streets. Priests prayed. Women and children wept. Jerusalem had walls, but no army. The people begged Balian to stay and lead them. Here, Balian faced an impossible choice: honor his oath to Saladin, or abandon thousands to slaughter. Balian chose conscience over oath, but he did not betray honor. He immediately sent word to Saladin, explaining his situation and asking forgiveness. Saladin, recognizing the dilemma, released him from the oath. The siege was now inevitable. By September 1187, Jerusalem was no longer a city of confidence. It was a city of fear. News of the disaster at Hattin had reached every street and household. Refugees poured in from fallen towns, bringing stories of defeat, captivity, and loss. The walls of Jerusalem still stood strong, but its defenders were few. Most trained knights had died or been captured. What remained were civilian, clergy, and aging soldiers who had never expected to fight for the city's survival. Balian of Ibelin understood the truth immediately. Jerusalem could not withstand a prolonged siege in the conventional sense. Yet surrender without resistance would invite chaos and despair. He made a painful decision to turn civilians into defenders. Blacksmiths forged weapons day and night. Priests carried stones. Boys and old men were taught how to hold swords and man the walls. In a symbolic act of necessity, Balian knighted dozens of commoners, transforming bakers and merchants into knights. It was not an army of strength, but an army of resolve. When Saladin's army arrived before Jerusalem, the contrast between the two sides was stark. Outside the walls stood one of the most disciplined and powerful armies in the medieval world, battle-hardened veterans of Hattin, united under a single command. Inside the city stood desperation, courage, and uncertainty. Saladin did not rush to attack. He knew Jerusalem's value was not only strategic, but symbolic. This was a city sacred to Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. Its capture would echo across the world. Saladin positioned his siege engines carefully, avoiding reckless destruction. His archers tested the walls, while engineers studied weak points. Meanwhile, he offered terms, peaceful surrender in exchange for safety. Balian refused, knowing the people of Jerusalem would never accept surrender without proof that resistance had been attempted. The siege began with thunderous stones striking ancient walls, dust filling the air, and prayers rising from both sides. This was not merely a military confrontation. It was a struggle over memory, faith, and the judgment of history itself. As days passed, life inside Jerusalem deteriorated rapidly. Food became scarce. Water supplies were rationed. Fear spread faster than hunger. Families crowded into churches, praying not for victory, but for survival. Every dar of Saladin's siege engines echoed like a reminder of inevitability. Yet Balian remained visible, walking the walls, speaking to defenders, sharing their hardship. He never promised miracles. Instead, he promised honesty. Women carried stones to the battlements. Monks stood beside soldiers. The city became a single, desperate body resisting collapse. Still, Balian knew the truth. Time favored Saladin. When a section of the wall near Mount Zion was breached, panic swept through Jerusalem. The defenders managed to hold the gap temporarily, but the illusion of safety was gone. Jerusalem could fall by force at any moment. What remained was one final decision: how it would fall, and at what cost. When Balian rode out to meet Saladin for negotiations, he carried no arrogance, only reality. At first, Saladin refused to speak of mercy. He remembered 1099, when Crusaders massacred Jerusalem's Muslim and Jewish population. Why should this conquest be different? Balian answered with brutal honesty. If the city were taken by force, he said, the defenders would destroy holy sites, kill prisoners, and slaughter their own families to deny victory. It was not a threat of cruelty, but a declaration of despair. Saladin listened. He understood that a blood-soaked Jerusalem would poison the victory he sought. He was not fighting merely to reclaim territory, but to restore honor. After long deliberation, Saladin agreed to terms. Civilians could ransom themselves. The poor would be protected. Holy places would be respected. This moment defined Saladin's legacy, not as a conqueror driven by revenge, but as a ruler conscious of history's gaze. War paused, and humanity intervened. On October 2nd, 1187 CE, Jerusalem surrendered peacefully. There were no screams, no rivers of blood, no fires consuming sacred streets. Instead, keys changed hands. Banners were lowered and replaced. Muslim prayers returned to the city after nearly 90 years. For Christians, the moment was heartbreaking, but not catastrophic. Families were allowed to leave. Churches remained standing. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre was protected by Saladin's direct order. Balian worked tirelessly to organize ransoms, negotiating lower prices and freeing as many poor citizens as possible. Saladin himself paid ransoms for thousands who could not afford them. This was not the conquest of a city through terror, but through controlled authority. Jerusalem changed rulers, but it did not lose its soul. The world watched, and history remembered. Saladin never defeated Balian of Ibelin on the battlefield. Instead, he defeated him through moral contrast. Balian expected death, imprisonment, or humiliation. Instead, he was treated with respect, allowed to leave, remembered with honor. In return, Saladin gained something greater than a city legitimacy. His conquest of Jerusalem became a symbol of justice in an age of cruelty. Balian's legacy became one of tragic nobility, a man who fought not for glory, but to protect lives. Saladin's legacy became timeless, not because he captured Jerusalem, but because he chose mercy when vengeance was easier. Their encounter stands as one of history's rare moments where power and humanity intersected. In 1187, Jerusalem fell, but civilization rose.
الله أكبر